None of the content on this or any episode of the Kratom Science Podcast, Kratom Science Journal Club, or on any page of KratomScience.com is intended, nor should it be considered, medical claims or medical advice. This is the Kratom Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. So we're going to do something new that is, it'll be a valuable podcast to do once a month, and that'll be covering the latest Kratom news and a little bit of the science that came out. We usually do one of the latest science articles with Dr. John. Kailee works for Kratom Science, and she's been doing really good clips and videos about strains and whatnot for YouTube. See our YouTube channel. Just look up Kratom Science. There's actually another Kratom Science, but if you look up the one with the green and blue leaf, then you'll know it's us. So, welcome, Kailee.
Hello. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Cool. Anyway, we're gonna go back and forth and read news stories mostly, and I think we have one science article that we're gonna read, but I think this will be pretty valuable in updating our listeners, and we're gonna trade off reading the story, and then we each have one or two thoughts that we have about the story. Okay, this is the first news item. PA House passes bill banning the sale of Kratom to minors. And this is good news because nobody wants people under the age of 18 to use Kratom. It's an adult substance. But here you go, I'll read it. I should have gotten a PA source, but this one was it pissed me off a little bit, so I picked this one. It's from WKBN in Youngstown, Ohio, and it came out on June 28th, 2022. A bill that would ban the sale of Kratom, a hallucinogenic drug, to individuals under 18 passed through the Pennsylvania House of Representatives with a 197-3 vote on Monday. According to FDA, Kratom is a drug derived from a tropical tree from Southeast Asia. The leaves of this tree contain compounds that could cause hallucinatory effects, and the National Institute of Drug Abuse, it's actually on drug abuse, said it produces opioid-like effects. Okay, so Kratom doesn't produce hallucinatory effects. There was an article called Kratom-Induced Psychosis. This guy decided to stop all his medications and take Kratom, which was the dumb thing to do because he was on adrenaline medications, he was on hormonal medications, and he basically went crazy, couldn't sleep, and was up for 10 days before he came to the doctor. If anybody that's up for 10 days for any reason is going to have psychosis, just because he decided to only take Kratom. And I also did one of the first articles I did around here when I wrote for Kratom Science about, this is almost 4 years ago now. There was a science article, actually, that listed hallucinations among the effects, and I traced it back to an article by Dr. McCurdy, who's the top Kratom scientist in the United States, and he was actually doing a generalized article. This is from 2004 on legal highs, and one of the legal highs was salvia divinorum, and on YouTube years back there was kids taking videos of themselves smoking this stuff. That does cause hallucinations, but Kratom doesn't. It was very clear in the paper. So this article that said it caused hallucinations, me and Dr. John call it the game of telephone. It goes back and back and back and back, and somebody made a mistake, and scientists don't do their homework sometimes, just like everybody else. It's not a main point of their paper, so they just kind of shorthand it. So there's no evidence Kratom causes hallucinations, and kind of took a little more time. This journalist from WKBN in Youngstown, Ohio. He's not a Pennsylvania journalist. Another possibility is he might be confusing the terms psychoactive and psychedelic. Psychoactive means anything. Coffee's psychoactive because it wakes us up. It does something to our brain that makes us wake up. Psychedelic means you're tripping.
Hallucinogenics.
Yeah. This journalist's name is Glowacki, I think. I'll call him out. I don't care. He's talking to her. The 3 people who listen to this, it's not going to hurt his career.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand why he wouldn't, like, how he couldn't have gotten something more recent, because there's definitely other stuff that you could find that actually tells you whether or not, like, it is something like that. And it's almost as if, like, the news station that had him write this article was just like, oh, you know what this is? Okay, yeah, cool, write it. And then he did no further research on it. And I equated it to a Facebook status from someone I went to high school with, because this is stuff I see all the time. Just sharing misinformation because they think they understand something, and they really do not at all.
Yeah, really. And, on the news, that you should think the news has some kind of standard, but really it doesn't seem like a lot, especially local news. I think it's because their budgets are low. These report, like, in their defense and trying to be sympathetic as a writer with these reporters, they probably have to write so many articles per week. They have Google right there, and they don't have a science background. But however, as a journalist, you should want to dig into things and check yourself, and it wouldn't take that long. It really would have only taken me an hour to write a story like this, even at the beginning of writing about Kratom. I mean, of course, it would take me a lot quicker now that I've researched it a lot.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, if you just spend a little time to just dig in a little bit, or try to contact one of the scientists and say, does it cause hallucinations? No. But I'll go on and keep reading the story. Okay, this is from the story. Quote, as of right now, Kratom is not a controlled substance. This means anyone, regardless of age, is able to purchase the drug. This is true. While the Food and Drug Administration hasn't defined Kratom as a controlled substance, it is listed as a drug of concern, and some have said users have become addicted to the drug. It might not, it's listed as a drug of concern, but the way he wrote that, it seems like it's the FDA calls it that, but that's actually the DEA's job. The DEA decides what is and isn't a controlled substance. So right now, after the 2016 pushback from the Kratom advocates, the DEA said, okay, we're not going to make it illegal, but we're going to call it a drug of concern, not the FDA.
I feel like that's something that could have been easily cleared up for him too, if he would have done just a little bit of research like journalists are supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like, it wouldn't have taken not any time at all. Just type in literally, what does the FDA do? What does the DEA do? It would have been so easy, but I digress.
Yeah. It says it's listed as a drug concern, but in the same sentence that he says FDA. So it goes on. Officials from NIDA said there are no official uses from the FDA, but people reportedly use it to manage drug withdrawal symptoms, pain, and fatigue. So he got some of this right. I don't know what official uses means, though. But I think what he means is, as in, there's no medical use because it's not an approved drug.
Claimed it, yeah.
Okay, so the article goes on. It is important to note that while Kratom may not be regulated by the FDA, NIDA said Kratom has a very low overdose fatality rate. They said for 2011 to 2017, 11 people died from Kratom, and only 2 of those deaths were associated with Kratom by itself. I have no idea where he got this number, and the sentence doesn't really make sense. 11 people died from Kratom, and only 2 were associated with Kratom by itself. The FDA's numbers are much higher. They would say, I forget what they're up to now, of Kratom related, which is actually, like, the paper I'm working on now is about liver toxicities and drug interactions, and Kratom actually does slow the metabolism, probably, of fentanyl, which is why most of these Kratom related deaths are people that have also taken fentanyl, because it just makes it just blocks the fentanyl from clearing metabolism. So that's which is why I think everybody on the Kratom side, or they at least should say, don't take it with other drugs. Even a lot of regular medications, you have to be careful. And he only said 2 were associated with Kratom by itself. I think there's a little bit more than that, actually. I think the FDA claims 7, and it might be that.
I think I remember you saying something about that in another one of the podcasts, like when I've gone through and kind of worked on them a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I remember you touching base on that, and the numbers were much different than what he has attributed here. And that alone just makes it, like, kind of solidifies it as one of those small town Facebook posts that doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, or big city. Well, Pittsburgh's a small city. But I'll show you all of my friends, too, and cousins who I blocked. Yeah, and he actually lowballed those numbers, I think. Like, those are actually low. I mean, so, so if we're trying to gauge whether he's pro or anti-Kratom, I think he's trying to at least be balanced with misinformation going both ways. Okay, so here we go with the article. Quote, the bill, if approved by the Senate, would ban the sale of the drug to minors and place a fine of between $100 and $500 for the first offense on any retailer that violates the law. The language in the original bill, I wrote an article about it on Kratom Science, had a lot more rules than just restricting it to under 18. And some of these fines seem a little low. If you sold alcohol to a minor, I don't think they would be that low. Although alcohol is probably a little bit more dangerous, but I don't think kids should be doing any of this stuff. In the original bill, the language had rules for labeling. No synthetic kratom should be in the bill. But what happened? This guy Frankel, he actually said, there's a lot of redundancy in there. The original bill said, well, it can't be adulterated with illegal drugs. Well, nothing can be. They're already illegal. So it was written poorly, but I wish some of those things would be in there. Like it says, it said originally in the original bill, it said it shouldn't be contaminated, it shouldn't have adulterants in it. The whole thing, in some of these bills, I've noticed they talk about synthetic kratom, and there really isn't such thing as synthetic kratom yet. It hasn't been synthesized in the lab. I think maybe some of the lobbyists didn't understand that, and they wanted to it's okay that it's in there because it doesn't matter because it doesn't exist anyway, but then that gets you probably get into legal trouble because some of I think Tennessee, like in the early days, was one of the first to outlaw kratom because it lumped it in with the bath salts and some of the stuff that is synthetic. And it was like kratom came around. That's why it has such a weird... it could be like a kombucha tea. Like, kombucha has risks, too. If you take too much of that, it'll probably hurt your liver. Kratom came along with being sold alongside K2 Spice, bath salts, and all. Bath salts are basically synthetic cathinones. Cathinone is cat, and that's a plant that's chewed by... I think people in the Middle East or North Africa. I think it's North Africa. It's kind of a stimulant, kind of like cocaine or coffee. But kratom came along with those things, and people were getting dangerous side effects from synthetic bath salts, even before people were taking large amounts of kratom and getting bad effects from it. In Tennessee, they said, we're banning all these synthetic drugs, including kratom, but kratom isn't a synthetic. So some activists there got that overturned, and I've always wanted to contact them and have them on a show, but yeah, so it's just written poorly, and I understand why that lawmaker Frankel wanted to switch it, but at least in Pennsylvania we might, and it's only in the House, so it has to go to the Senate, and the governor has to sign it. I imagine nothing's gonna happen this year because Pennsylvania is especially with the Roe v. Wade thing, people are focused on other stuff. If it'll pass, that'll be good, but it seems like the enforcement is very low, like $100 for first defense if you sell kratom to somebody that's under 18. That's pretty low. So I actually think the laws should be stronger, but it's at least a first step, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to evolve over time because, like, as you said, most likely they're not going to do anything about it right now because there are much bigger problems at hand. But I'm sure, like, as it kind of sits, they will revise it and kind of change things.
I mean, I'm surprised it even went to the House and passed, because it sat there for a while in that health committee. Because I was going to go down to, because I'm on the West End, I was going to go down to, what's his name's office? Dan Deasy. He's my House rep, and it already passed. So, and I didn't even go down because I thought it was just going to die in the committee. So I'm like, I'll just go see him when there's something that's going on. But it actually passed, and I'm sure he voted for it. Only 3 people didn't vote for it. So, but it's actually good that the Pennsylvania House is showing a willingness to regulate it, and it's not quick to ban it. So hopefully we're safe in Pennsylvania for a while.
So the next one that we have is by the Bangkok Post, covering the how the online kratom sales are okayed by Thailand's House. Thailand's House of Representatives has passed a revised kratom bill that will enable people to sell kratom-based products online. At present, people can sell kratom plants and leaves, but kratom-based goods, including food and drink, are not allowed to be sold. However, the sale of kratom and food that contains it will not be permitted to people aged under 18, pregnant women, and breastfeeding mothers.
And that's literally how it's written. You read it, everything right, but it's like the translation. I should have looked at that. So Thailand just legalized kratom like last year, and cannabis for medicinal purpose, and I think cannabis for recreational. And I spoke to Pascal Tanguay. He's like an international drug policy expert. He's French Canadian, but he's lived in Thailand for the past 20 years, and he's been studying these issues. And he was telling me about how it's, the weird laws they have. It's not allowed to be sold like this, not allowed to be sold like that. What the article doesn't say, what I don't know, and what I should email him. I don't know if I did. My question is, will they be able to sell online internationally? The article doesn't say it, but it's like a whole new avenue of sales. Like Americans, we get all of our kratom, and it's like 95% or whatever. Like, some people might know a guy somewhere else that grows kratom. There's and there's also like domestic, a couple of farms that probably sell fresh leaf. There's this guy, Will and Walt, in Florida, that have a big kratom farm. And then my friend Soren from West Virginia, where Kaylee's from, everybody.
Yep.
He has a kratom greenhouse in West Virginia, and but it's like a whole nother market where we can get our kratom from. And it's interesting to see if it'll be any different than the stuff that comes from Indonesia. What Pascal did say to me was they're in it for the money. Like, that's why they legalized it, and I'm sure they want to sell it for the international market. But I just don't think there's going to be the farms in place for a few years to to compete with Indonesia. I think right now it's just mostly wild. It grows everywhere, and it's mostly people that traditionally there that picked it off their trees in their backyard. And it's also been like, there was a section of Thailand, and I forget what it's called. There was like one region of Thailand where it was actually legally protected because it was traditional.
Because if it was like international, they would have made it a point to actually include that in the article.
Yeah.
Just because if they want it, because they're doing it for the money, they would want everyone to know, any potential buyers, hey, we're selling to you if it's legal where you are. Please buy.
Yeah. So. But I am seeing like guys like, I don't know if this has happened to you yet on your social media, if you ever said the word kratom anywhere, but since I do, like the Kratom Science Facebook, and we get tons of people from Indonesia. Like, everybody that's involved in publicly talking about kratom gets tons of people from Indonesia. Do you want to buy kratom? Do you want to buy kratom? And recently, we've gotten a couple of people from we started to get people trickling in from Thailand. Like, they go into my like spam folder on Twitter, and every once in a while I'll check it, and it'll be like, "Hi, I'm a grower in Thailand. Do you want some kratom?" So everything about the kratom market is quasi legal anyway, both foreign and domestic. So they there's probably guys trying to do it anyway.
Oh,
and get away with it. So, good luck getting it past the FDA. That's the FDA is legally allowed to seize kratom shipments at the border, and they use U.S. Marshals to do so. And the only issue is U.S. Marshals have better shit to do than seize kratom from the border. But it's legal to buy and sell within the border, so it's like these laws need to be really. But it looks like they're moving ahead there in Thailand. All right, we'll go to the next one here. I'm rambling too much here. So the next one was interesting to me because when I studied like traditional kratom use, it doesn't seem like it seems like it's more of a coffee thing, and people say it's been used ceremonially in some of these science articles, and it says that, but there's no real evidence of that. I think Pascal found something from like 1615 that had a kratom plant on it, and who knows if it was ceremonial or not. It's not really a religious type of drug. I mean, I think it's mostly used for, get up in the morning, get you going type of thing before you work in the fields.
I can't really see how you could use it ceremoniously. Like other things that, I mean, maybe, in the right setting, I could guess perhaps you could. But like the other things that have been that are 100% known to have been used ceremoniously, I could totally see, like cannabis, for example.
Yeah, or peyote.
Oh yeah, definitely stuff like that.
I think it's more like a coffee and donuts after mass thing. Like we had that. I went to Catholic church, but any church, sometimes you have coffee and donuts at the reception hall after mass. But yeah, kratom's more like that. It's more like a coffee thing in those countries. But here's this. This is another story. It's from the Nation, Thailand. We have the Nation in our country, but it's their Thailand version, I guess. It's from July 1st, 2022. All these are. Every time we do this, it's going to be hopefully from the past month. Buddhist monks banned from using cannabis except as medicine. That's a headline, but it also includes kratom. The Sangha Supreme Council, SSC, has banned Buddhist monks and novices from smoking or growing cannabis, but permitted them to use it to treat illness. This is in Thailand. I don't know if they're affiliated with the government, but it's a council that oversees religious activities. The ban covers cannabis, hemp, and kratom, all of which have been legalized following the removal from the Public Health Ministry's narcotics list. The legalization of cannabis on June 9th led to concerns that monks and novices may start using the herb freely and even to grow the plants in temples. That'd be a cool Buddhist temple to visit. National Office of Buddhism spokesman Sita Moonhog said the SSC is the governing body of Thailand's he said the thing that I said before. The SSC is the governing body of Thailand's Buddhist order, serving as the ultimate authority on holy matters. Thank you. What is it?
Yeah.
Ecclesiastical matters. Yeah, I haven't said that word since 8th grade. Explaining the reason for the ban, Sita said that although the Buddha's teachings did not directly prohibit the use of cannabis, hemp, or kratom, the plants have impacts on the user's mental and nervous systems. As a result of those impacts, users could act in a way that violated monastic precepts. And I've studied Buddhism a little bit, read a couple books, in the past few years and decades. I think Buddhists mainly, they have this whole precept of the right mind, and they just want to keep their mind clear. Their whole thing is like, you can get everything from meditation that some people get from drugs, and you just want to keep everything pure, and meditation will help you deal with any of the anxieties and depressions and stuff that always come along, because meditation's kind of like you treat all those bad thoughts as clouds, and your brain is the sky, and you just sit with it. Yeah, and I even got, like, from Wikipedia, the quote, most Buddhists view the use and abuse of intoxicants to be a hindrance in the development of an enlightened mind. So they're just not big on any psychoactive substances.
I felt like the fact that, considering the article itself was wanting to focus on the use of cannabis, I just felt like the fact that they felt the need to even mention, like, how they were dealing with Kratom, in that, like, it was just interesting because it felt like they were trying to equate the two.
The first law that was big news was cannabis and kratom are now legal for medicinal purposes. A year later, or 2 years later, I forget what it was, they moved kratom and cannabis for, I think, recreational, or people can grow them now. So that's probably has something to do with it. Yeah, I mean, this, like, Sangha Supreme Council, it seems like a religious / political organization, so they probably said, well, now, since these things are legal, don't be growing them in church.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was raised Catholic, and I'm just no longer. Haven't been for, 20 years. But if they start growing weed in church, I might go back. I don't know.
It'll definitely change the atmosphere, like, completely.
We always had alcohol in church, but only one sip. One sip in the middle of Mass. And it didn't really help. That much didn't really help you deal with, the priest's brilliant sermon.
Yeah.
I'm not going to shit on priests.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, I get enough trolls as it is.
The next one that we have here is actually an article, like a journal article, not journal article, scholastic journal would probably be a better word.
Yeah.
Written by Dr. Does she pronounce it Kirsten or Kirsten?
Kirsten.
Okay, yeah, I've seen both, so I just want to make sure. By Dr. Kirsten Smith and a few other major.
I don't know. Maybe it is Kirsten. I don't know. I went to Baltimore and had dinner with her and me and my wife went to Baltimore, and I think I introduced her as Kirsten, and she didn't say anything. So. Okay,
if she didn't say anything, maybe, or maybe she just didn't even hear you.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Who knows?
That's beside the point.
Yeah.
So the article we have here is focusing on a study that she conducted with a few other researchers, titled it "Kratom Use as More Than Self-Treatment," and it was conducted back in May 2022. I almost said just 20. And there they found over 40 motivations for using kratom among the 129 people that they polled. And here we have a little quote from the introduction to the study. Quote, in surveys, use is often attributed to self-treatment of chronic pain, fatigue, mental health, and like anxiety, depression, and or substance use disorder symptoms or goals of improving energy and mood. Use motivations with public health relevance amidst the broader opioid and polydrug crisis is the use of kratom to reduce substitute for or abstain from licit or illicit opioids and possibly alcohol or amphetamine type stimulants. Existing surveys are limited by assessment of broad use motivations and insufficient information regarding temporal order of kratom use initiation relative to other substances. Prior surveys have not asked whether decisions to try kratom were influenced directly by shortfalls in existing medical treatment, such as difficulties accessing evidence-based SUD intervention, chronic pain management, or mental health care. Lastly, surveys have focused primarily on kratom use and not discontinuation. This small cross-sectional survey was designed to expand information related to kratom use in the U.S. and gather formative data needed for the development of subsequent studies. And here it says the number one motivation reported by 66.7%, so it's pretty significantly over half of kratom users was, quote, just to feel less crappy in general and improve quality of life.
Yeah, and that was on the survey too. That's what I like about Dr. Smith. First of all, she went to federal prison for robbing a bank when she was addicted to heroin. and she admitted this on another podcast. She gave Ethan Nadelman that exclusive. I didn't know about the bank robbing thing. She didn't bring it up. But this is a National Institute on Drug Abuse study where she works. And in collaboration with some other researchers from different places. They were trying to do more and more accurate surveys. They're about to conduct another one. And these things are so important to bring to the scientists who just study how does it affect your brain and how does it work on the metabolism. And they look at addiction as a thing that's not really that complex. And she, as a person who was addicted to heroin previously and has tattoos and went to prison and has life experience, her being in the sciences is so valuable because she brings such a real world perspective to this.
Oh yeah.
And finding out why people, because hallucinating and getting high wasn't one of the listed answers. And I think this, just to feel less crappy in general, that crappy was on this scientific survey. That's what they asked people. They gave them a list of multiple choice, and I think one of them was like getting high or something like that. And I don't think anybody or hardly anybody picked that one, but just to feel less crappy in general and improve quality of life. And that's totally why I use Kratom and why my wife does, and we hardly ever use it. I'm not a daily user. Sometimes I do it 3 times a week, and that's like a crazy amount for me. I don't have. A lot of people probably say chronic pain and stuff like that, but it's important to find these like real world reasons that people use these things, and not just like look at the blood tests and look at the metabolism, look at the pharmacology, and then just assign that. That's kind of how our approach to drugs has been, and then alongside the punitive, if you have a drug problem, go to jail type of thing. So it's really valuable work she's doing. I'm really privileged to know her and correspond with her as a source, and she'll send me these studies. Like, they're not always available. You have to pay for them. Like, you can get any study. I'm just telling this to anybody listening. If you look up a study and you just see the abstract and then it says full text and then they say you got to pay $40, you can just email one of the scientists and say, can you send me this? And they will, because they don't get money from after it's published. They get money from maybe their university for doing the work.
Comparing, because here you have talking about contrasting the first report, just the words in general, like you can tell this is something that they're actually passionate about there. They know what they're talking about. And that alone is extremely valuable. Just like in conjunction with everything else, you can tell that she has been involved with it herself. And especially since she's so open with, telling her story, because I know she's actually told her story. Because how many times have you had her on here? I feel like you've had her more than once.
Twice, yeah. Twice on the podcast.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've, in one of the ones that I've done the captioning for, I remember her, she's like, this is not, I'm not trying to hide anything from anybody. Everyone knows this. I will tell you again. She's very open about her life. And I think for something like this, that's what you need. If people continue to read these and continue to push these up, I think that will be very good to help with further legislation.
Exactly. And that was an important point about the first thing we read. The guy's just trying to write a story about drugs, and the first scientist I ever had on, Mark Swagger, I told him it was kind of like drug horror fiction. Like, it goes back to Reefer Madness. It sells. I mean, there was a story I saw today about a lady who touched a dollar bill and passed out because she thought there was fentanyl on it. You can't get fentanyl exposure through the skin. You could hold a pile of fentanyl in your hand, and unless you breathe it in, it's not going to infect you. But there's a rumor going around that you can absorb fentanyl through the skin. You can't unless it's a patch, and the patch takes like 48 hours to work. Stories about Kratom come out, and it's just from people who are ignorant and they don't pay attention to it. And it's like these scientists, That's why it's important to go on PubMed about any freaking issue that you want. Kratom, COVID, abortion. If you look up the science and just read the abstracts, these scientists could be wrong about things, and me and Dr. John talk about that, and he's like, he has a PhD in neuroscience, so I could ask him, and they could be wrong about things, but they're at least trying to do the work and pay attention to it. They're not just going with their gut or, whatever they think or what their mommy and daddy told them. It's so important to read. The abstracts are the thing to read, abstracts or introductions. So even if you don't understand the scientific terms, these social science studies like this one, and the study is kratom use as more than a self-treatment, they are pretty easy to understand.
Something I think some people need to also think about as well is, because you said scientists can be wrong, people need to really realize that, because a lot of people, thinking specifically like with COVID and everything, a lot of people were angry because they were like, why are they changing everything now? Don't they know? As if they don't understand that science is a process that takes time and it's a lot of research. So I think it is very important that you mention that for anyone who, for whatever reason, though I don't think anyone listening to this podcast, I hope people listening to this podcast would understand, that science is a process and scientists can be wrong.
Absolutely. And probably would have been bored a long time ago if they don't really understand that basic thing. When we were in Baltimore and we hung out, she was like, I'm not pro or anti-kratom. If I find out kratom is going to kill more people than it helps, I will absolutely put out a paper to tell you that. It's really looking at evidence. It's observable, evidence-based way of looking at things, and we need that. It's valuable. It's essential, really. So that was the science one, and this next one is, so we had three that were like news reports. So this one is from Marijuana Moment. It's this dude, Kyle Gallagher, the guy who wrote this. He's a good guy. He and I have corresponded. I asked him to be on the podcast, and I didn't hear back from him. Kyle. But, no, that's okay. He writes a shit ton. I mean, he's busy as hell. But Marijuana Moment is a great resource. I'll tell everybody that, whether or not he decides to be on my podcast. But he does cover kratom issues when they come up. There was an article like this last year, and this is good news. House committee leaders tackle marijuana research, kratom, impaired driving, and more in new spending measures. So this is from Marijuana Moment, June 29th, 2022. House Appropriations Committee leaders have released yet another set of spending bill reports that touch on marijuana and other drug policy issues like kratom, with this latest batch focusing on cannabis research barriers, impaired driving, and preventing use by youth and pregnant people. Much of the report language centers on studying cannabis, including one section that reiterates the committee's ongoing concerns about barriers associated with investigating Schedule I drugs like marijuana that effectively limit the amount and type of research that can be conducted. And I've asked multiple scientists about this, and they're like, yeah, it's way harder to study illegal drugs than it is to study legal drugs, which is one of the main reasons they should remain illegal or become illegal. While the report says it appreciates the National Institute on Drug Abuse has submitted documentation outlining the research implications of strict scheduling of certain substances, it notes there are still challenges such as the fact that scientists are still not able to access cannabis from dispensaries, even though President Joe Biden signed an infrastructure bill last year that included provisions meant to promote such access. So that's really important because the legal federal cannabis that's allowed to be studied is University of Mississippi. And they grow really bad weed there. It's like dirt weed from the 60s. It's not the stuff that people are using today that's much better just through the evolution of underground growing of weed. That's what everybody's smoking now. And scientists should be able to absolutely get these things and study them. Notably, the report again talks about promoting research into kratom, a plant that has been used as an opioid. That's the kratom part. But do you have any thoughts on the cannabis part?
So this little chunk that you have highlighted here, I think it's kind of surprising to me that there haven't been steps toward this, because, where we've been pushing for this legalization for so long, you'd think that they would want, or like the people working in the dispensaries, managing them and stuff, they would want this testing to take place so that we can have 100% proper regulation, to kind of match with what I was going to say people on the streets. I guess people on the streets still getting stuff too, but stuff that they're federally administered maybe would be a good way to word it. The legalized stuff should definitely be tested and researched on and stuff.
Yeah. And I think it has to do with, like, labs have to get a DEA license to study drugs that are federally illegal. And even if they get that license, they can only get marijuana from this University of Mississippi farm that has really bad old outdated marijuana that they continue to grow. And I even talked about Dr. McCurdy, the kratom scientist, used to work at Ole Miss, and he worked with cannabis and all kinds of these things, and he's like a medicinal chemist. He even said, yeah, this stuff, I don't know his direct quote, so I shouldn't even said what he said, but he even, to the effect of, yes, it's hard to research stuff, and he was talking about in the context of DEA licenses. Like, I mean, he'd been studying kratom for that long, and he said when they thought it was going to become illegal, because you can study kratom, anybody can study kratom because it's federally legal. Any scientist can go out and buy some, get it from anywhere, wherever they want, and study it in a lab and submit a peer-reviewed paper on it. There's so many CBD studies. I have in my Google alerts stuff like something comes up on PubMed or in the news, I get an email that says this is being studied. Well, I get kratom. There's a scientific study every couple of weeks. With CBD, now since hemp is federally legal, every day I get a whole list of studies of stuff they're looking at CBD and particularly on, but they can't do marijuana with THC in it because it's not federally legal. And once it is, it'll be wide open for, benefits, harms, people who shouldn't use it, people who should. So it's like, yeah, I mean, we gotta promote the sciences here, and it just doesn't make sense. Anybody in America that wants to smoke weed can get it. And along with every other illegal drug, pretty much. So this article also talks about kratom. So notably, the report again talks about promoting research into kratom, a plant that has been used as an opioid alternative, as well as therapeutic tool in combating withdrawal symptoms. Given the potential promising results of kratom, the committee is recommending human clinical trials to further explore the plant as a treatment option. So this is basically how the House of Representatives is going to decide where they're going to allocate money for their budget. I should have said that earlier. They're putting out a report that says this is where we want to spend our money this year. Last year, the year before, they gave $7 million to the University of Florida to study kratom, which was awesome. And that came directly from NIDA. So the House of Representatives is saying, hey, NIDA and National Institute of Health, here's where you should spend your money. So here's what the report says. This is from the House of Representatives under kratom. The committee recognizes that NIH and NIDA-funded research has contributed to the continued understanding of the health impacts of kratom, including its constituent compounds, mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine or mitragynine. No, we're never going to decide on how to pronounce these things. The committee is aware of the potential promising results of kratom for acute and chronic pain patients who seek safer alternatives to sometimes dangerously addictive and potentially deadly prescription opioids, and of research investigating the use of kratom's constituent compounds for opioid use disorder. The committee acknowledges NIDA's support of preclinical research on the toxicology of mitragynine, which will enable future studies of its safety, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
Tolerability and clinical pharmacokinetics in humans. The committee also urges NIDA to consider. I could have edited this. The committee also urges NIDA to consider. Well, I'll know for next time. A human clinical trial on its therapeutic effects to treat opioid use disorder, especially in light of the increases in overdose death during COVID-19. The committee commends NIDA for funding studies on Kratom. Based on promising results that unadulterated Kratom may provide help for some Americans struggling with addictions given its analgesic and less addictive properties as compared to opioids. That's great that they're getting, this House committee is getting the message. And that's no, I mean, the politics of trying to get laws passed are messy, and I always point out how messy it is. But, that is due in part to the lobbyists and the American Kratom Association pushing this narrative, and us as a Kratom community spending our way into that lobbying space, which is a shame that it has to be like that. But at least they're listening, and it goes along with the science too. But more importantly, NIDA is promoting the science of Kratom. For most people, it looks like it's helping them. So it's good news for continued legality. It's similar to a statement they made last year. I remember writing about it last year, and hopefully it means it'll be more Kratom funding down the pipe.
The last 2 years, they've been really they've tried to focus on it. I do think that especially depending on how the outcome of the research that they've been funding, it definitely looks pretty good.
Hell yeah. What did you guys think of that? I thought that was cool. We're going to be doing this once a month. Kailee did a great job. She's from West by God, Virginia. Kailee just graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a film degree, so there's no way we're not going to be doing some video element of this podcast at least, and putting some shit on YouTube. Bringing you guys a Kratom news update. The music is Risey. The song is Memories of Thailand. Kratom Science Podcast is written and produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.